My name is Alan Benson, and I am a part of the African American Initiative. And I would like to welcome each and every one of you all to our Education Summit. We have a group of scholars and esteemed speakers that's going to discuss policy, initiatives, and issues as it pertains to Jefferson County. With that said, I would like to introduce to you all our leader, State Senator Gerald Neal.
Thank you, Alan, and good morning. I have to tell you that the African American Initiative is not something that has a leader per se, although it's very kind of my friend to say that. It's really a collaborative of individuals such as you coming together to deal with policy questions. And what I want to emphasize as a fact is that we don't do program, but we do policy. And the reason we do policy is because we see programs are important. That's where things are implemented, of course. But policy is where it begins. Policy sets the framework. Policy puts things on course. So turning our attention to policy, looking at who's at the table, engaging those at the table, is critically important to any community, let alone the community that we're focused on now, and that is the African American community. So we make no bones about it. We're about everybody, but we want to make sure that we deal with issues and have policies that resonate and impact positively on communities that we're focused on. So we're delighted that you're here today to do this. Now I'm going to preliminarily just tell you the way this is going to proceed is that we're going to have two panels, a round table, and an armchair. Well, what do we mean by that? We have a first panel that sets the stage. You know, what are the perspectives with respect to this? Our good friend Stephanie Bateman is going to moderate that particular panel. She'll step up in just a second. And then the second panel will be moderated by Dr. Geneva Starks, and that will deal with the racial equity policy. Very much want to get into that particular piece. Then from there, we'll go to the round table, and that's where Miss Diane Porter, board chair, as well as Dr. Wayne Lewis, the interim commissioner of education, Kentucky Department of Education, will give some presentations about what they think are important, and then sit down to a discussion about that. And then lastly, we will go to lunch. And I got to tell you, we probably didn't anticipate as many people as we signed up. We normally focus on about 75 people to 100, but 160 signed up. So that's a good and bad. So we're going to work through that and see where that goes, and hope you'll work with us on that particular goal. Now I'm delighted to introduce, I call him an enabler, because see, this could not happen in this spot on this day if it was not for the president of Jefferson County Jefferson County Technical Schools, Dr. Ty Handy. Dr. Ty Handy is here, but I want, before he says something and brings us welcome, I want you to know that because he identified and related to what we were trying to do, we were able to form what we refer to loosely as a partnership. And because of that, we're able to be here and be accommodated by him. Without further, I want to introduce Dr. Ty Handy. Please give him a round.
Senator Neal, so great to have you all here today. 160 folks, that's wonderful. We're quite capable as a college, but we would have a hard time turning 100 lunches into 160. But if anybody can do it, anybody can do it. It's like the fish in the loaves. We're really pleased to have you on campus. We have a great relationship with the senator, and we feel honored to be able to support these events. Today's focus is obviously important. Got a great crowd attendance, and so I'm excited to have you here to do that. It's good to see you. One thing I want you to know about the college, though, how many of you all, is it the first time you've been on campus here? Anybody? So a fair number. Okay, so let me just give you a little bit at the risk of making Ralph Fitzgerald mad at me. He got up and walked out already. Oh, there he is. There he is.
Thanks, Carolyn.
How many freshmen, sophomores does U of L have? 6,400, I believe. 6,400, right? Quite a few. Jefferson has 12,000 freshmen and sophomores. So that means two things. One, we're very important in terms of a gateway to college for so many students in this region. I mean, we're all often here. And secondly, it means we better have a great relationship with U of L, because every year we send over 700 students that direction. So we're the biggest sender of students to U of L in the region. And so we work very closely, and we're building that strong relationship with JCPS, because that pipeline has to get bigger. We need more. They need to have 8,000 freshmen, and we need to have 15,000 freshmen and sophomores coming through the pipeline. So I'm glad to see U of L here represented and us being able to work with them so closely. And then secondly, I'd like to say that of those 12,000 students, 4,000 of those students are come from underrepresented minority groups. And so that makes us the largest server of URM students in the state. We have I think U of L is second, I think UK is third, and I think Kentucky State is fourth in that. And so we know that working together, we're also the primary resource for helping underrepresented minority students come to college. And we've actually seen a decline, and I saw this happen to UK in an article about 3 or 4 days ago, or about a week ago. We've actually seen a decline in our percentage of African American students. So when I got here 3 years ago, we were at 21% of our student body, and now we're at 19% of our student body. But also something else has happened. The percentage of students who claim themselves to be 2 or more races has gone from 3% to 7%. Right? So I don't think we've actually seen a decline. I think people are much more willing to go ahead and categorize or place themselves in a different category than maybe historically. Our biggest growth is our Hispanic student population. It's grown from 3% to 7.5% in 3 years. So a lot more Hispanic students taking access to our college. So what's important is that we may provide that access, but we also have to provide that pipeline to the 4-year degree for those who want to go for the 4-year degree. So we're glad to be here, be a part of this discussion, and I look forward to thousands more JCPS students and students from Jefferson County coming to our 2 institutions. And thank you, and have a wonderful day today.
Thank you.
Failed to mention that our roundtable will be what we call an interviewer moderator by Dr. Ishwanzia Rivers, professor, University of Louisville, and she'll be handling that part of it. And I will sit down with Dr. Polio at lunch. I don't know if I mentioned that or not, to have an exchange with him. So I would ask Stephanie Bateman to, thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you, Senator Neal. It's my pleasure to be here this morning with you. As he said, I'm Stephanie Bateman. I'm the former, retired now, Director of Communications in Jefferson County Schools. And this is a privilege. This is a privilege. Today we're going to get an opportunity to hear from those who are really intimately involved, either as parents, community leaders, employees, or students, to gain some perspective and insight about what's working, what's maybe not working in our public school district. And I'd like to introduce the panel to you now. On my far right, we have Carolyn Webster, a student in Jefferson County Public Schools. Next to her, we have an NAACP Education Chair, Dr. Catherine Wallace. Then we have community leader and former president of Metro Council, Mr. David Tandy. We have middle school teacher, Ms. Batia Edison. And here on the end, we have a parent, Mr. Bernard Jackson. I'd like to welcome you all this morning to the panel. So let's start with this question. For each one of you, what do you see working? What do you see that's good? What do you see that may be a little bit lacking in our public school district? And don't everyone jump in and grab that mic all at once.
Can y'all hear me okay? Yes. I'll let them figure it out, how to turn it off. Well, first of all, good morning, everybody. Good morning. So, I will, 1, 2, okay, there we go. Okay, and shit, I'm gonna hold it away a little bit because it's a pretty strong mic, so I'm a little tired about it. Here's what, just my initial impressions of, with JCPS. Here's what I think it works well, and why I am a consumer, and why I and my wife are consumers of the JCPS product. We have 3 kids. I have a freshman now at Manual High School. I have a 5th grader at Coleridge Taylor Montessori, and then I have a 4th grader also at Coleridge Taylor Montessori. And what I like about JCPS, and this is coming from the standpoint of, I grew up in Owensboro, Kentucky, which you had a more traditional model of how school assignment worked, where you went to school where you lived, and so everybody was running to certain parts of the community to try to live in those areas so they can send their kids to that school. What I like about Jefferson County is that you get to tailor your child's education to their particular interest and to their particular learning needs, or the way that they go about learning. And so for us, all of us who are parents, every child is not the same. Even within your own household, and you come from, both of you have the same parents, you have the same genetic makeup, but that first child can be completely different from the second child, which then can be completely different from the third child. And so having the opportunity to then be able to tailor what that education, how your child is going to learn and what's going to best fit their interests and their needs, I think is important. I get it from the standpoint of, as a parent too, now you got 3, and let's say you have 3 different kids, and they're all going to 3 different schools, the logistical pain that's associated with that. But that's what I think is the benefit of JCPS. One of the things that I do find, however, that is a drawback right now, but I think the school system is addressing it, is with our racial educational equity plan. I think it's a step in the right direction. I think a lot of times people learn by seeing themselves in the subject matter, and it's been something that we have not really paid attention to in the past. A lot of times it has fallen more on the parents at home to supplement what's being taught in the classroom. So like, for example, how many times have we gone through American history class, you get to the one page, well, back in my day, it was the one paragraph on we get to the Civil War, and you get the one paragraph on, okay, there were slaves and that wasn't good. But now we're moving on, and you move to the next thing. Or you get to the Civil Rights Movement, and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was great, and Lyndon Johnson passed the Civil Rights Bill, and now we've moved on, right? But then you don't get into the deeper discussions as to, these were, here were some of the other, effects of, here's what happened during the Civil War and beyond, and during the slave period here, and then here's the repercussions of here's what's happened, afterwards. So going deeper into the learning, but then also then showing, other positive aspects of it. So I'm going to stop right there and let others talk, and then if I have an opportunity, there's some other things that I do think that we can add to enhance our children's educational experiences as it relates to future opportunities.
Dr. Wallace?
Okay, some of you probably know that, it doesn't work for me. Okay, some of you know that for 10 years, I was the first Director of Minority Educator Recruitment and Retention for the Commonwealth of Kentucky. So I see things probably a little differently than those of you who have not worked in that kind of environment. One of the things that I think is working well in Jefferson County right now is the fact that we do have the Division of Diversity, Equity, and Poverty. I think that division has made a significant difference in what's going on in public schools here as it relates to minority children. Now, I'm not saying African American, I'm saying minority children as a whole, because we have a significant number of Hispanics and Asians as well. I think one of the great things that they come up with is the Du Bois Academy. I think that many of our young men will benefit significantly from what they learn just in a school that concentrates on developing African American or other male students. Sometimes our young men get lost in the shuffle at large schools, say for Ballard and Eastern and Seneca. So I think this is really important. It also goes to address the issue of heritage for minorities. So I think that's important as well. So I give them credit for that. I think what's lacking is parental involvement. Some of us as parents don't go to school. We don't check on our children. We don't help with homework when they come home. And we're depending on the school system to fully educate our kids. And we can't do that. These are our babies. And so we need to be hands-on. We need to make sure we know what's going on in the classroom and what's expected when these kids come home in terms of getting homework. And I think there needs to be more parental involvement, especially for minority parents, when it comes to site-based decision-making councils. They play a significant role in what goes on in that school. And there are schools in this district that have never had a minority parent sitting on that council. We need to have a voice. So our parents need to be present there. The lack of minority educators is troubling for me, because that was something that I cherished. I traveled the whole United States recruiting and attracting people to come to Jefferson County to be teachers. And we have fewer minority teachers now than we had in 1991. That's troubling for me as a grandparent and great-grandparent with kids in the school system. Student placement, I think, is another problem for me. We have some schools that have 2% minority kids, and that shouldn't happen in a district this size. So those are the things that I see need to be improved on.
Let's hear from our teacher.
Everybody on the panel has already pretty much said what I would like to say. We have diversity. Our programs, our magnet programs are wonderful. Just like Mr. Tandy has said, we have, you are able to send your child to a school that can nourish their growing. So I'm also a parent, and my students, my kids have went to Western Middle School, which is a performing arts school. And they are able to go to that school even though we're not a neighborhood school, even though we don't live close to that. So I cherish what the district does on that part. And then I would also say that as a minority teacher, there definitely is not enough of us. I've been in schools that out of 60 teachers, there's only like 3 African American teachers in the building with 50% population of traumatized kids. And I think that we do not address all of the needs of our kids, because our kids are coming to school with trauma, and that affects their learning. And if we do not address that, then we are really not doing anything but increasing this achievement gap. So I think that we really need to focus on when these kids come to school. If we're focusing on the achievement gap, we need to focus on what is happening at home. The parents might not be able to be there, and how can we advocate for these students more? So that's my concerns.
Honestly, I'm trying to be as positive, because the good part, I don't necessarily see the good part, because I'm a very involved parent with both my children, and I've actually had a child from Atlanta live with me in custody, but I had to make the hard decision to send it back just because the school system here isn't really, I guess, up to my part. So the issues that I have is, like I said, I'm a very involved parent. I'm up at the schools all the time. I may go to school and they still give me the "who are you" look. I'm like, okay, well, I've been here 30 times in 29 days, so you should know who I am. And then when I have suggestions for the learning of my child or questions, I'm not always welcome. So I don't know if it's the dreadlocks or I have tattoo. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's the culture. I don't know what it is, but there are things in the Jefferson County that some of the teachers or administrators aren't aware of or ignorant to the fact of culture or I don't know what it is. For example, my son and his friends, they're on the bus, they're little jonesing on each other a little bit or whatever, they're having a good time, they're best friends. There's a girl that comes and joins into the group. They said joke to her, my son gets suspended because she starts crying. Well, she joined into the group. And I guess my point is the racial insensitivity or knowledge of racial culture in the school system is allowing teachers and administrators to suspend our students at an early age. For example, my son, he has been suspended several times, and I don't play that life. I don't play getting no suspended, no trouble. However, that's what happens. So then in kindergarten, he go sit in Miss So-and-so's class. He's missing instruction because she doesn't understand how to handle my son. I'm not saying handle, that's not a good term, but they don't know how to redirect or whatever the term, professional term is to my son. So now he's missed half a year of instruction because he has to go to somebody else's class. And I know we got other things to talk about, but that was just kind of just a couple of examples for me that I know needs to be worked out. I don't think needs to be worked out. I know needs to be worked on.
Well, thank you, Mr. Jackson. Now, Carolyn, our students, you really have the nitty-gritty, so you tell us what's working and what's not.
Yes, ma'am. So I'm a student at Ballard High School. I'm a senior, and I want to highlight more of the positive things that I think have happened even since I've been a student there. So I do recognize that we, of course, have a lack of African American or minority teachers at Ballard in general. I think we have maybe 4, and I am co-president of BSU, our Black Student Union, this year. And someone had brought up to me, that it just bothers them. It feels good to learn from someone that they feel like, I guess, can relate to them. And so, more so on topic, one thing that I do appreciate is the fact that they have sort of addressed our needs a little bit more, and they've added classes like African American literature and African American history, and there's so much that we have missed out on, and that those students that came before me have missed out on because they didn't have that type of, I guess, opportunity or, people that were listening to them.
All right, I think this is the microphone that's causing the feedback, so, can you hear me?
Yeah.
If you can hear me, that's fine. Given the items and the things that you've already mentioned, what do you think needs to be done to address some of the problems, some of the lack of minority teachers, the fact that schools aren't as welcoming as maybe they should be, the whole issue of racial equity? What do you think can be or should be done?
I honestly don't have the answer for that, but there has to be, there needs to be some type of sensitivity. That's the only word that I can really relate to all of the factors that we're talking about. Because we go into school systems, and I will go and sit, and I'm an intelligent man, and I will go and sit in front of these people and have suggestions. And it's kind of like, when we have programs in place, and I need you to trust that these programs are working. I'm trying my best to trust these programs. However, and like I said, I know I don't have the answer to what needs to be done. I just know as a parent, I'm frustrated because I have a child who's confident, who's handsome, who's bold, who's beautiful, and all these things, but is being held back because we don't, as part of a parent, and we don't know how to get these things going. So I guess that's why I'm here today, but amongst all the educators and all that to try to understand. So I don't know.
One, I think we need to have smaller classroom sizes. Some of these classes have 28 to 30 students in them with one teacher, and we're differentiating classes and or the lesson. But also, I just saw that the rating, that just came out, and I think it's Roosevelt Perry, is an elementary school in the West End with probably 99% trauma, and they actually did not, they were not labeled as TSI or CSI, which I'm concerned about, because are we giving funding to the schools that are in need? And if so, then why is Roosevelt Perry not one of those schools? We need to really address, if we are community activists and we know what's going on in these communities, we really need to address what is going on with these students and identifying which students are coming in with what trauma and how are we going to address that. Because I, as a teacher, am not able to teach linear equations or two-step equations if this child has just ducked at the middle of the night because there was shooting and their house just got shot up. So these are things that we as a school system, we have to embrace. We are not homogeneous. Our students do not come to school privileged. They do not come with extra resources in their neighborhoods. We need to give funding back to the schools that need it.
So I'm going to say this. I agree. I think, first off, we all need to recognize, and I think that sentiment's been recognized here, that there's not going to be one answer to solve it all, nor can we expect whatever programs we come up with to be a one-size-fits-all type of a process. Educating our kids is going to be hard work. Education, I think, is holistic too. So I do, at this point, I want to kind of interject from the standpoint of, from an economic development side of things, because you're right, a kid who presents at school is in part the byproduct of what they are dealing with at home. And so when we're talking about having more parental involvement, on its surface it's easy to say, but then I'll put myself in the shoes of the parents or parents who are working 2 to 3 jobs to make ends meet. Then you're asking them, okay, well, I need you to show up for a PTA meeting, I need you to come for parent-teacher conference, and I want you to check your child's homework. But your job as the parent, you're saying, my job is to put food on their table, right? So it's incumbent upon all of us as a community too, recognizing that, to say, what can we do to have wraparound services and involvement to help? Because it goes beyond, like, I tell people all the time, I've got my 3. Carolyn and I have our 3 kids, and we are actively engaged with them. But at the same time, we will do what we can to be engaged with the other kids as well as being a positive influence on them. In part because I look at it from the standpoint, the other kids that I'm dealing with are my kids' classmates. So if they're disrupting in class, they're affecting my kids in class. So if I can help them out and being a positive influence, whether it's like for example, I'm a football player by my, I guess, avocation in college. That's how it paid for me to go to college. I'm coaching basketball now for an elementary school team. Now, I look at myself not as the basketball coach, I'm more of the effort coach, I'm more of the effort, the discipline. But I will tell you this, coming from a household of, my dad was an educator and also a coach, I know the life lessons that get taught outside of the classroom in other activities, right? There's opportunities for learning and for teaching. And so if you can engage them in that way, whether you're helping with the cheerleading squad or the dance squad or the step team or the academic quick recall team at your school or what are going on field trips, even if it's not your kids that are going, but being there and being that positive influence, I think that's one way of doing it. The second thing that I will say is I know that we're reading the paper, there's going to be a look taken at our curriculum and how we are teaching, what we teach in our classrooms, right? I believe that's right, Secretary, that there's going to be a look at that. As we are looking at how to tweak and change our curriculum, one of the things that I would encourage us to do is to, I agree with the move to look to try and incorporate more vocational tech education back into the educational experience for those students who believe that's a career path for them, because there's a definite need for that. We're losing HVAC technicians, electricians, plumbers, etc., all because of just the way that our aging population is taking place, and so we want to do that. But I would also encourage us to take a look at introducing entrepreneurship and finance into the curriculum as well. Because one of the things you're seeing now, the days of working on a job for 30 years, retiring, getting to go watch are done, okay? So it's good to learn a skill set, but what's more important is, what is equally as important is learning how to learn, because we're going to change jobs. What was it they said, 11 times in your lifetime you're going to change your job, or maybe too high, but you're going to change your job a number of different times, right? I mean, even those of us in the law practice, we say we practice law until something better comes along. So, we know that, you're going to do something else. So I think we have to, look at that as well. And and I think there's an opportunity for us within JCPS to help with the overall economic enhancement of the families of the students that are coming into our school system by utilizing the buying power of the school system itself. This is one of the things that I'm working on now that I'm back in the private sector, is encouraging more and more businesses to leverage their normal spend that they normally do and being more intentional about who do we do business with. Because one of the things that you find is when you do business with a minority-owned or a woman-owned or a veteran-owned business, you tend to circulate dollars within those respective communities. And so therefore, when I go back to the original point of my comments where I said you have a parent who's working 2 to 3 jobs trying to make ends meet, well, in large part that's because they can't find the jobs or have it that are paying the wages at a high enough scale for that. But if I am employed by an MBE or a WBE or a VOB, veteran-owned business, and they are a healthy, thriving entity, then likewise, that should allow for my wages to go up. It causes me to go from working 2 jobs to 1 job to now being able to then be engaged in my child's educational process, right? So that's something that JCPS can do with its, actually, folks don't realize this, that JCPS's budget is larger than the city of Louisville's budget, right? So leverage that. And I will be saying the same thing to Metro government. I say the same thing to my law firm. I say it to other entities, and I would encourage you to say it to whoever your employer is too, to be intentional with who you do business with. Because I know it doesn't look like there's a direct line to education with economic development, but when you get down into it, it all plays with each other.
Thank you, Dr. Wallace.
I want to kind of piggyback on what Mr. Tandy said earlier about parents working and not being able to be at the school all the time. From 1992 until 2002, Jefferson County had a parental group that was called A Voice for Our Children. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with that or not, but that was really a great program. It was funded primarily through money from Jefferson County Public Schools and money from the Kentucky Department of Education. That program focused on parenting skills. And if parents were working at night and didn't have anyone to stay with their kids, another parent would assist. Sometimes the kids would stay in the home of the assisting parent, and sometimes the woman or parent who was assisting would move her children to the other parent's home, just so they would have a sense of stability. Many times, we don't have fathers in the home. And it's really good when another father will step in and help a mother raise a son. And that's what A Voice for Our Children did. We supplied parental needs where there was not someone in the household. And I wish we could go back to something like that. It was not an expensive program, but it was a program that worked. And I think it developed relationships within the community that we don't see on a daily basis. We as a community used to always help each other. We shared, and that's something we need to go back to. The other thing that's a real problem for me is the lack of African American history. Now, I'm old, but I remember when we used to celebrate Black History Month. We don't even get a Black History Day. But our children need to know their history. They need to know how this country has treated people of color, not just African Americans, but Hispanics and Asians or whatever, because that's a part of this culture. And we need to understand how each group of people feel about what's going on in society. So I think that's important as well. And there needs to be some teacher sensitivity training. Some teachers don't relate well to people who don't look like them. And that happens on a daily basis. I'm in and out of Jefferson County Public Schools weekly. And I observe things, and I have mentioned to several principals, you need to have a collective meeting with parents so that you can hear how they feel about how you're treating their child. Some things a child says is not taken the way it's intended. And then the child is restricted or punished for something he or she did not know was offensive. So I think that kind of sensitivity training is crucial for us. I guess that's about it.
All right, Carolyn, what do you see as some of the deficiencies in school, in your school? What deficiencies in school?
Personally, I feel like we just lack that community that used to be there. There's not a lot of interpersonal relationships between teachers and students, between like upperclassmen and the freshmen. Specifically at Ballard, we have a freshman academy, which essentially like excludes the freshmen from the rest of us. And it was in good intentions to try to make it an easier transition from them coming from middle school going into high school, but like we were discussing it in BSU, and we realized that we don't know any of them. There's no way we can help them. They are the future, not only of our school, but in general. And we're trying to find more ways to connect with them, and we're trying to work with the administration and get that worked out. But I think everyone really covered different like programs that we could have implemented back into the school system that would help not just Ballard but JCPS in general.
All right, let's switch gears just a bit to priority schools. And I know Ms. Edison mentioned smaller classes, and you mentioned Roosevelt Perry, but now they're called TSIs and CSI schools. What needs to be done to help those schools progress and maybe move out of that priority status? We'll start with you.
Well, like I said, we need to identify, the school system needs to be able to identify what's going on with these kids, the students, what kind of trauma they are going through, what their needs are. There's a lot of schools where kids cannot have books, so then when they go home to do homework, the parents can't help because they don't have books. So I think that just a lot of resources need to be invested in these schools because just as a parent, like we said, we have 3 kids, or I have 3 kids, and if one of my children are sick all the time, I have to invest more resources in taking them to the doctor, taking them to the hospital. So we have to be intentional on funding in these areas of the schools. And we also need to be intentional on making sure that we have community involvement and parent involvement, like they said. When parents come in, sometimes they don't feel welcomed. We need to be having events to where the parents can come all the time, and not just one event, because maybe they can't make that one event. But we need to be just intentional on funding, identifying trauma, giving resources to the parents, advocating for all these students, especially special needs. And I think that's about it.
Dr. Wallace, what do you think about that? Priority school kids?
Well, I think that everything she said I agree with, but last year I served on a parent advisory board at Minor Daniels Academy. That was a real experience for me because I had not been in a priority school, so I was not prepared for some of the behavioral issues that we had to address. But what I found was that many times teachers provoke students, and that's a real issue in these priority schools. How we're going to address that, I don't know, but I think one of the great things that we could do is to make sure that the principal or any administrator in that school has had some experience with children with behavioral problems. And I don't mean intellectually, I mean just behavioral issues based on how they live, what their surroundings are like. Children are very sensitive, especially when they're teased by other children, and that happens a lot in these priority schools. For instance, many of you may remember last year, or maybe it's two years ago, 2 young men left Minor Daniels School because they felt like they were not being treated fairly. And these kids had been in trouble in numerous schools, but they were in Minor Daniels and they decided they were just going to walk out. And no one could stop them. The police officer was standing by the door, and all he could say to them was, "You cannot leave the school grounds." And they threw up their hands and said, "But you can't touch this." Within an hour, we got a phone call that these 2 kids had been shot up near Churchill Downs. One of the young men died. That should not have happened. There needs to be a way that we can communicate with these young people so that they understand we care about them. We want what's best for them. And I don't know if it requires working with parents and the kids, but we as a community, we've got to find a way to do this. And Jefferson County Public Schools ought to be leading that effort.
We keep using the word community, but my son, actually both my sons live in a neighborhood where they don't go to school with any of their, they don't go to school with any of their friends, or they don't live in the neighborhood with any of their classmates. So, like you said, you'd be willing to help kids around the neighborhood or whatnot, but they're not even the same school as them. So there is no sense of, in my instance, there is no sense of community, because when my child goes to school, he comes home, the same people that's in the neighborhood weren't at the same people at the school. So he's like, well, he doesn't have lifelong friends like I had, going to school with people. And I know that's probably a total different category, but it's hard to build community when 8 hours out of the day you're not with the people that you're supposed to be building with. That's my opinion.
Yeah. So let me, it's a good point. And so let me address it from the standpoint of what I was talking about. So remember what I said early on, I came from a product of a school system where we were more of the traditional model, kind of like what we grew up with, right? Where you went to school in the neighborhood. I rode the bus with guys in my neighborhood. We would then after school play ball together, that type of thing, right? As a parent of this generation now, one of the things I realized was like, okay, those days were gone as it relates to, to here, because you don't go to school in the same neighborhood, okay? Now, but that being said though, my kids still have friends that I think will be lifelong friends for them because that they made there. To me, community is so if I'm at that school is my community. Those parents and those children are my community. The church that I go to, we don't all go to live in the neighborhood around the church that we live in, but nonetheless, that church is still our community, right? We may belong to different, fraternal organizations, or we're a part of different groups or whatever, but those groups become our community, right? And so what I'm saying, when I use the word, be engaged in your community, I'm actually using it in that context. What I was talking about was the broader community. So basically, I'm looking at everybody in Jefferson County, everybody who had similar experiences or we're going along this journey together. That's what I'm kind of what I'm talking about, right? And so being engaged at my kid's school with kids, yeah, we may not live in the same neighborhood, but there may be times where I say, okay, you guys come out to my house and I'll, you guys can, play. I mean, this concept of having to schedule play dates and stuff was foreign to me, but I mean, that's kind of like, it's where we are right now. So that's what I meant by that. Oh, but I will say this since I got the mic. The one thing that I do want, I hope doesn't get lost on us, all of us in here. When we start talking about the need to see ourselves in the curriculum or those subjects that we study and people who are teaching us, the majority of this room is African American. But I want it to be very clear, when it's equally as important for those who aren't African American, who may be Hispanic, who may be Asian, who may be Caucasian, to also participate in that educational process as well. What I want, and I think what I heard Dr. Wallace talk about was, you want your students to see the greatness in themselves, and then you want the teachers, those educators and administrators that are engaging those children to see the greatness in them as well. So if they get caught in this mindset of, oh, well, this is a troubled school, and they come from, and there's all these problems back home, well, that's the exception to the rule. That's not the rule. Because one of the things that we try to teach, I just use, again, I'll make it personal. Carol and I are teaching our kids, you are great, and you come from greatness. And if I have to remind you of who you are, then we take down the list in terms of history of the historical figures, but then we also look at within our family itself, right? Or then we start pointing to other people that they know in the community and say, well, like, for example, Ralph Cunningham would say, you know Uncle Ralph? Yeah, we know Uncle Ralph. Did you know that he helped lead with the civil rights movement? No, I didn't know that. Well, you're not going to get that in the classroom, right? But they see that. So I want, I think when we're talking about inclusion of the African American experience, I don't want it to be left that we're talking about just the negative stuff. But I really want us to enhance and educate on the positive side of it too, and tell the whole story, so that then when I see you or I engage you, I see you for the full person that you are, and not just that limited scope or that limited view that I might see out of a history book, or what I might see portrayed in different images on media or social TV or whatever.
Carolyn, how are students, you mentioned that you have the freshman academy and the freshman kids are kind of off to themselves. How are students interacting with one another? Different groups of students? Are the cliques? Does just all the black kids stay together? What's the atmosphere like in school? Okay, it won't go any further than that.
Just ignore the cameras. And all the cell phones.
Yes, I would say there are cliques. I feel like regardless of what school, if you're going to another school, there will be cliques as well. But as far as how we interact as students, I think the best thing we have is the different clubs, the different organizations, the different programs. And there's programs like, not just for us as minorities or, just separating us by ethnicities. There's like Future Business Leaders of America. We have Dance Maroon supporting children with pediatric cancer and raising money for that. We have a variety of programs that allow us to interact with people that we may not see, in our classes, because we do see a separation in comp classes, honors classes, than we would in AP and dual credit courses. And I think the best way that we interact is through our organizations after school rather than the ones during.
Okay. I want to kind of piggyback on something that Mr. Tandy said. I think that all of us as adults need to recognize too, whether we're in school or in the community or just in our homes, we serve as role models for our children. And many times, they react to how they see us acting. If we're doing something silly, something out of line, they pick that up, and some kids think that's cute. They need to be made to understand that not everything you see you need to replicate. Not everything that you hear you need to replicate, because you'll be surprised at the number of young children who use profanity in elementary school. And they get that at home. They don't get that from the classroom. So we need to be very careful, because they do imitate us.
Final question to you, because we have about 5 minutes left before we break. What grade would you give Jefferson County Public Schools? And tell us why. Mr. Jackson, I'll start with you.
Out of 5, Sid?
No,
Like
I
what?
think we have about 5 minutes left.
I would give them a C, because I understand that there are valiant efforts and actual genuine efforts. It's just that, I guess in my personal experience, I've yet to see the results. So it's not that I'm just down to JCPS, it's just that I understand that there's a lot of work to be done.
I would also say a C, because we do have an achievement gap. Our kids are not learning at the same level, but I do believe that we are moving forward in trying to address some of these issues. And hopefully, in the next couple of years, we'll get more minority teachers. We'll get more funding for the schools that the students are in need. So I would say a C as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. There's a lot. Well, I think I think there's a lot that we can do to be better as a school system. But I will tell you this. I mean, I'm always, I don't know, am I a C or am I a C plus? I don't know. See, I'm somewhat of the easier grader that's out there, I guess. But I will tell you this. I speak highly of JCPS in terms of, and I think it's more about what the potential of what it can be and what it can do. I love like I said, I love the fact that I have the choice as a parent to find and tailor the educational needs to my child, and that, but I still look at it as incumbent upon myself as a parent to then be actively involved in my kids' life and supplement their education. So we'll go deeper when I say, what's the concept that you're learning today? Well, we learned this. Okay, well then we're gonna go and answer the question, well, why? And go deeper. And they hate seeing daddy come in the car asking questions. But yeah, so that was my grade. I'll give them a C plus to help the curve.
It's difficult for me to give a 1 grade to all aspects of Jefferson County Public Schools. I have been around long enough and worked with the school system long enough that I can see the progress that we've made when Dr. Harkins was here or when other superintendents were here and where we are today. If you think about the improvement that we've had just in the last, say, 4 years with minority, with diversity and equity and poverty, we didn't have that before. And now it's not just a person who has a director of, he's an assistant superintendent. So, and he's doing great things. Other superintendents never saw the need for this kind of program. We knew we needed it, but no one wanted to fund it. No one wanted to support it. So when Dr. Harkins implemented this program, to me that raised the level from a C minus to a B minus, because they put a lot of money into that and they put a lot of effort into it. We still have a long way to go, but it's so much better than what we were. Now, academically, we have some schools that are near the top, and we still have some that are at the bottom. So it's hard to give a general grade, because we've got some excellent schools, but then we've got some, hey, we really need some work on. But I think a lot of that is not just the school, but it's the teachers and their commitment too, the administrators' commitment too. You know, we have administrators that are moved from year to year, and if they're that bad, why do we keep them? If they're not good enough for one school, why do we put them in another school? So I think we as parents and citizens need to step up and speak up.
Girl, you get the last word.
I agree. It's very hard to grade the entire school, the JCPS district. If it were just my school, I would give it a B, but because it's JCPS as a whole, I have to go with the B- because although there has been a lot of change since I've been a student at Ballard, I realize that we have a very long way that we have to go. And I feel like everyone's pretty much covered different ideas and things that we can do to better this, but I think another thing is just trying to connect with, I know you can't always connect with every student, but trying to find the different ways that students learn and how we can just help them, because after a while, it's just gonna be us leading the world.
That is so true. Thank you. Let's give our panel. All right, it is 9:55. I think you have a 5-minute break before you go to your next panel. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry. Yes, we'll be back here.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to get started.
keep me too long. I got a tendency to go somewhere else in the classroom.
Can I help you?
Good morning, everyone.
Need everyone to be seated. Those educators, we need you all to be seated, please, so we can get started. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. We're ready for the second panel regarding racial equity and policy. And it's a great segue from the previous panel that dealt with experiences and expectations for Jefferson County Public Schools. Jefferson County Public Schools, the Board of Education, just passed a racial equity policy in May. And the policy was based on the fact that over the last 10 years, that Jefferson County Public Schools have not adequately educated African American children, those who were poor and those who were affluent. So today's panel is going to address the racial equity policy that Jefferson County Public Schools has passed. And I'm going to introduce the panel to you this morning. And we have Dr. John Marshall. He's the JCPS Chief Equity Officer. And Dr. Marshall has been recognized by Education Week as one of the premier Chief Equity Officers in this country. Let's give him a big round of applause. And that was based on the fact that he holds JCPS accountable for the inequity that occurs in this school district. And as he states, he is unapologetic about doing so. Thank you, Dr. John Marshall. We also have Dr. Crystal Drescher-Burke, and she's going to focus on data, for JCPS. She's a data community specialist, and she looks at the hardcore data and be able to tell us exactly what it means. We have Mr. Delquan Dorsey. He is the JCPS Community Engagement Officer. And we have Ms. Dina Dotson. She is the Chief of Research and Development and that hardcore data as well. And so this morning, they're going to share with you exactly what that means for JCPS in moving forward. Because what we talk about is where JCPS has been, where we are now, and where we are going to. So that's the focus of the panel. So this morning, to get started, I'm going to ask Dr. Marshall, what is the purpose of the racial equity policy for Jefferson County Public Schools?
Good morning. The purpose of the racial equity policy is to address the inequities that have been long-standing. Ralph Cunningham, who we all know, said this is 40 years late, not 40 years too late, but 40 years late. The inequities that the policy attempts to address are things that happened when I was in school, when I was in kindergarten even. So what we're trying to do is address the policy in a couple of tenets: access, curriculum, culture and climate, district plans, school plans. In doing so, we plan to actually hold the district, hold departments, and hold teachers, principals, and everyone accountable. Real quick, every chief, Dr. Dawson, myself, and the other chiefs have accountability plans and district plans that we're going to be held accountable for. But one of the things that's very important about this policy is I agree it is 40, 50, 60 years late, but it is something that only 7 other districts have even tried to do, and none as big as ours. So as we move the work forward, it is truly to look at the inequities, it is truly to understand where we are headed, and it is truly to see how we can get things done differently.
Okay, thank you. Now regarding to school plans and district plans, what is the schools are going to use to make sure that they're not marginalizing any student or any particular group?
I will talk briefly about the REAP, the Racial Equity Analysis Protocol, then I will hand it over to Delquan Dorsey or Dr. Dawson. So inside of the policy, there is a protocol called the Racial Equity Analysis Protocol. The protocol in and of itself is nothing more than a battery of questions. However, we understand that if you go through these battery of questions before you make a sound decision, you decrease your chances of marginalizing or proliferating the inequities that are inside of the district. In doing so, just Wednesday, we had all of the principals come with their SBDMs to a training on the racial equity policy and the racial equity analysis protocol. One of the expectations is for principals and SBDMs to use the racial equity analysis protocol and run it through this battery called the REAP, Racial Equity Analysis Protocol. But also when we start talking about how are we held accountable, the district is sending in teams to each and every school and into the district and into departments to look to see if what you wrote down in your school plan is actually being done. A document is coming out from my department. We're going to actually blitz the schools 3 times a year called the EMPT document, EMPT, Equity Monitoring Progress Tool. And we're going to measure what you said, what the school said is inside of the protocol or inside of their plan. So this is not just something to check off. This is not just something to look at. This is something that we have to measure and monitor to keep the work forward. I will hand it over to Dr. Dawson or Mr. Dorsey, whichever one wishes to add to it.
Just to touch briefly on the school plans that every school has developed, the basis of those plans started with an analysis of their data. And so our department worked very closely with Dr. Marshall's department and Chris in particular to develop equity scorecard. It is actually our 3rd iteration now of the equity scorecard. It started in 2012, just a district profile of where we are on different key metrics. So we're looking at hiring, we were looking at climate and culture, we were looking at achievement gap, dropout rates, graduation rates. And so we are now at our 3rd stage of that work. And what that means is every school has a equity scorecard that includes information that they are able to look at their students by student group and identify opportunity and access gaps. And that really is the start of their school level plan. So they can look at the information and they can see, do I have a certain student group that has lower sense of belonging, that don't feel engaged in their classroom community? What can we do differently with our professional development, our training for teachers? What can we do differently with our curriculum, with the classroom experiences that we provide our students so that they have an active voice in that work and choice in the assignments that they're working on? And so I just wanted to mention that equity scorecard is really one of the foundational pieces for schools to be able to make informed decisions around how they were going to work and improve the learning opportunities for every single student group in their building.
Thank you, Dr. Dawson. Dr. Drescherberg, as we look at the school card, can you share some of the information or share some of the findings about what that data looks like as it pertains to African American students?
Yeah, building on what to build on what Dr. Dawson said, we did expand the scorecard this year to have data for every single school. So it's a lot more useful for every school to develop a plan based on their own inequities. But almost every single school, we have over 150 schools, at every single school we see the same pattern, that the proficiency rates are essentially the lowest is African American students, then we have Latino students, and then white students. And we also have broken that up by lunch status. So the common argument is that we know that Black students are more likely to be eligible for free lunch, which is true. But even when we control for that, we still see the inequities. So even in some cases, we see that white students who are eligible for free lunch are outperforming black students who are not eligible for free lunch. So that argument of income being the primary explanatory factor is not true. We're not finding that's consistent.
Thank you. Someone mentioned earlier about, in the earlier panel about teachers, and what can we do to help teachers to be able to better educate our students as it pertains to
I think it's just crossing that big line.
Turn it off.
Yeah.
Okay, what can we do regarding under the racial equity policy, and what are we doing to better help and assist teachers as they work with African American students in Jefferson County Public Schools? John, you.
Okay, so to better help teachers.
Sorry, boss. I didn't.
All right, so to better help the teachers, one of the things we understand needs to happen is the training and the expectation, and to understand that there are teachers that are going to go into schools that are different than other schools that they're going into. But we also must understand that there's a level of introspection that must come with our educators. They need to introspect on their own biases. They need to introspect on how the system is successfully doing what it is designed to do. And I say that openly. The system is not broken, and we need to quit saying it is. The system is doing exactly what it is designed to do. And if teachers continue, and if we continue to talk about tweaking little things, we're going to continue to get the desperate impact that we have.
I'm just turning it off. I'm just turning it off. If I could figure it out.
All right, so if teachers continue to do what we have been trained to do, we're going to continue to get the outcomes that we have. We have to start talking boldly about curriculum that is exclusive by design. We have to boldly talk about a code of conduct that needs to be changed. And we need to challenge not just, I know we graded JCPS, but I remember when we started talking about changing the code of conduct, there was community members saying that we're also trying to make schools unsafe. So we're going to have to really be introspective and understand what we need to do. Because when Dr. Marshall and Dr. Dawson said we need to change the code of conduct and take away subjective behaviors, front page said JCPS making schools unsafe. Comments from some people in this room said Dr. Marshall and Dr. Dawson don't know what they're doing. And we're going to have to understand that if we're really trying to change a system, we really need to start with systemic problems. It's not just the leader up here talking about what we need to do. So to help teachers, we need to train teachers. And the training needs to start as early as high school, but we need to hold our colleges of ed accountable right now. If I did a syllabi audit of our colleges in Louisville, in Kentucky, you would not see in the majority of their syllabi words around anti-racism, words around cultural competency, words around urban school development. You might learn how to build a beautiful bulletin board, but you don't know how to build heart. So we're going to have to figure out what we need to do. And we're going to have to start really, really identifying who's supporting teachers and who's grabbing camera glory.
Thank you, Dr. Marshall. As we move to suspensions and the code of conduct, Dr. Drescherberg, can you speak to that? What is the suspensions rate looks like for Jefferson County Public Schools as it relates to African American students?
Again, as with proficiency rates, we see that African American males in particular are the highest suspensions. They're about twice the rate of their school enrollment. So they account for about 40% of all suspensions when they're only about 16% of our students. And again, we see that at every single school, almost without exception. So the code of conduct was changed recently, last year, the year before, to reduce some of those more subjective infractions, but we're still seeing the same pattern.
Oh, and I need to go back and Dr. Drescherberg said something about poverty. I want to put it in very plain terms. A poor white kid and a poor black kid should have the same score. They do not. The poor white kid is outperforming the poor black kid. So we have to start talking about teachers as opposed to the poverty that is damning all kids. So we need to stop as a system and as a community blaming certain things on poverty. Poverty is damning. A lot of us up here grew up in it. But when we look at the data says that there is still a problem, or there is still a gap between those. Flip it to the other side, an affluent black child and an affluent white child, there's still a gap. So green is not the problem, maybe the skin is, or maybe the understanding of what we do to reach these. Oh, and the poor white kid is doing better than the rich black kid. In some schools.
So with that, Dr. Marshall, as we talk about the racial equity policy, and we know that policies fail or sometimes are not implemented successfully.
Correct.
And JCPS, what are we doing to make sure that this policy does not fail?
So there are 4 tenets to justice policies and equity policies that cause them to fail. One is lack of oversight. The other one is left for interpretation. The other one is it focuses on the oppressed and not the oppressor. And then the 4th one is, political capturing. Political capturing aims to fix the oppressed, not the oppressor. Left for interpretation and lack of oversight. All 4 of those, if become successful, this policy will fail. We can look at the Brown versus Board. We can look at any policy around justice and equity. If we let those 4 seep in, political capturing being number 1, we're in trouble. Political capturing is when you leverage a policy, not to really support it, but to actually get in there and push your own agenda forward. Political capturing is when you make a bunch of comments about what we need to do, but then you have something in front of you, you really don't do it. Political capturing is putting puppets up in front to talk about what needs to happen, but not really doing anything to do anything about it. So when we talk about political capturing and we talk about policies, we need to start being real intentional about who the allies are and who the big mouths are. And we need to really start identifying the difference for those, because political capturing has happened a lot in JCPS, and this policy is very, very fragile. I want to be very clear. This policy is very, very fragile right now, because those 4 things have been successful for more than 40 years.
Can you speak more about the oppressed and the oppressor?
So yeah, in education terms, we say it's a teacher problem, not a student problem. This policy is not to fix students. This policy is to help teachers, myself, and others get better at what we do. When you focus on students and you keep saying what the students need, but you don't change yourself, it's kind of goofy. So the policy is to help teachers. You heard talk about training, you heard talk about access, you heard talk about teachers and administrators having to use data. That's what the policy does. When you have to put it on students, only not even a third of them have voting rights. They're babies. We're doomed to fail. It's a lazy way out, and we do it all the time. And myself included, we have to focus on what we as adults can and must do. And I want to be very clear. The policy is fragile because historically, whether you put it in any institution, those 4 things end up happening. And what this city needs to do, what this district needs to do under leadership of superintendent, the board, and the community, we must be very clear and discerning on, again, who is really about this life and who is about their own.
Okay, Dr. Marshall, you spoke to that DP. It's going to monitor this 3 times a year. That's the Diversity, Equity, and Poverty Department. So what we want to look at, because we know this is not a DEP policy, and maybe you or Dr. Dawson can speak to that, because this is not a Diversity, Equity, and Poverty Department policy, and it's a JCPS policy. So can we speak to what JCPS is going to do to make sure that we have oversight and oversight happens?
Yes, Dina sure can.
So one of the areas that I think is really important, as John mentioned, this is a fragile policy, and it takes everybody around the table working and supporting that policy. So we have what we're calling collaborative calibration visits, and what that means is we have district leadership going out into schools and visiting schools several times a year, and part of what they're doing with those visits is that they're looking at how are schools implementing their racial equity policies, and so they're identifying promising practices, areas where they need support, and that's where everybody's department can provide help. So if they need help in reforming their curriculum, we have our curriculum department to help with that. If they need help around professional development, we can go to our professional development experts and receive support in that area. So it is everybody's responsibility to make this policy successful. And we are, every week, schools are submitting weekly reflections around where they are on a number of different areas. It may not be that every week they're reporting on the racial equity progress, but they may be reporting on other systems that impact that. And so we have a team of assistant superintendents who are responsible for those schools that are reading those reflections and saying, here, how can I help support you in your role there? But it's not just on the schools, and it's not just about our support for the schools. Every department at the district level is also responsible for how we can help implement this policy. And so, for example, one of the areas that I'm working on with collaboration with Dr. Marshall and Dr. Coleman and Dr. Smith in our curriculum department is really looking at, for example, our policy around gifted and talented. We do not recognize gifted and talented in all of the categories that encapsulates for our students. We don't do a good job of that. So we're not recognizing leadership. We're not recognizing creativity. We're not recognizing everybody's gifts in the way that we really should be. And so part of our work there is to take a deep dive into what does it mean to be gifted and talented, and how can we make sure that we really are recognizing everybody's gifts in that way. That's just one example.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Dossett. Mr. Delquan Dorsey, another way of oversight is the Racial Equity Policy Advisory Council.
Yes.
Speak to that, and what is that council?
The council is made up of community members, parents, teachers, administrators, business owners, and it's basically the quality control component of the policy, making sure that yes, we got the accountability measures in place to be able to make sure we're going through the inertia of holding schools accountable, making sure that we're trying to reach our marks, doing the things, making the pivots to improve our situation. But this council is another.
What products do you sell with
ideas outside of the JCPS force field above what have you. But also let me say that I want to thank Senator Neal for having this event, and thank you all of you all for coming out, because one, we would not have this policy without the community's participation and showing up as well as our other efforts such as the Du Bois Academy. But just as much as you have been there for us now, up until this point, it's important that we just don't rest on our laurels. It's important that you continue to show up at board meetings. And not only just show up at board meetings when we agitate you and I text you to death and get on your nerves about coming out, but also making sure that you call your board members. Hopefully, as much as you say amen and and here, you pick up that phone come Monday and call your board members, let them know that you want to know what's going on with the policy and where they stand, okay? And not only just know where they stand and what's being done, how's it being funded, okay? I think it's, and then let me also say this. JCPS is an easy target to beat up on, all right? We don't play offense that much in the media. But to be honest, JCPS is just a microcosm of the broader community. Yes. All right, we wouldn't have to have a student assignment plan or busing if housing was integrated in that. Where's the accountability measure for that? When we try to integrate housing and move lower income housing out to more prosperous neighborhoods, what happens? The zoning meeting gets checked out and it gets stopped. Where's the accountability measures for that? All right. What about JCYC? Okay. Yes. Students of color are suffering in JCPS, but look at JCYC. How many students of color are there? Where's the accountability measures for that? All right. Where's the accountability measures for We talked about poverty earlier, and we understand what poverty, the impact on poverty on education, but where's the support for the parents of these students? Where are the economic opportunities for them? So yes, JCPS, we got some work to do, but we're doing it. What's going on with these other quality of life areas?
Thank you, Mr. Dorsey. Another question, because individuals want to know, how was the advisory council selected? Please speak to that so that those people who may have wanted to be on it but didn't know how to be, we just want to let them know exactly what was the process of forming that advisory council.
The process was basically, we had an application process, and then we had volunteers from the community that were identified that actually went through the due diligence of looking through the applications. Basically, what we were looking for was not only those who have been involved, but have displayed a consistent commitment to racial equity, not only in their careers, but in their volunteer efforts. And also there was this, it was an opportunity and an emphasis and an intention on getting some new faces. And because we understand that in order, this is the next generation of our struggle in our community, and I often hear civil rights talked about education being a new civil rights movement. So the intentions behind the committee was to get folks that were already active, shown a commitment, but get some new faces as well. And I'm very proud of the advisory council. I don't know all the date of births, but I'm just willing to say it's one of the younger councils in this community that is in serving an advisory role in that capacity.
At least 4 people are here. I saw.
Will those advisory council members please stand?
Kevin, Tyra, and Ms. Wallace is here too. Did I miss anybody? I saw 4 of you. Oh yeah, I saw that. Yep.
Mr. Dorsey, how often will this advisory council meet?
Well, according to the policy, is quarterly, but right now, because it's ramping up, we'll be meeting pretty often. We're looking at meeting actually this coming month, doing some work, and then in December as well, where we'll be getting with some of the chiefs as far as district plans. Okay. So primarily quarterly, but this is a work-hungry group, and they'll be, I'm pretty sure they'll be meeting more often than that.
Okay, great. Now, what is their role, Mr. Dorsey, Dr. Drescher-Burke, with the superintendent? How are they going to interface with him? Well, because who are they advising to, and who are they holding accountable?
Well, they're actually holding him accountable.
Okay.
And so they, but not just him. It'll be DEP staff. They hold us accountable. They'll be asking the chiefs about their plans, holding them accountable, and then of course the board. Not just within the confines of this racial equity policy, but also looking at various incidents as they arise, racial equity or inequity incidents as they arise. They will be offering recommendations as well as advising on that. So the board will hear from them as well. And we just had a recent work group session last Tuesday at Cane Run Elementary, and one of the board members actually asked the board, asked the council to hold them accountable and not to hold back. So that dialogue is taking place, and true enough, we give a lot of lip service, but I've seen the difference in my own schedule, my own calendar. I mean, we out every Saturday.
What products do you sell with Drive?
Because of everyone's concern with this. And the council is showing up as well. And a lot of them have already been engaged. But I think it's important that, we just not let this rest at JCPS, and we continue to focus on it, but we start to look at all the other things that impact what's going on in JCPS with our students.
Thank you. Dr. Drescher-Burke, you want to add something to what Mr. Dorsey just stated?
He covered it.
He covered it? Good deal. Test scores just came out this week, and I know it's a different test, but many people are confused. about what that means. Because someone asked the earlier panel, how does a BIC and a Roosevelt Perry not be a CSI school and some other schools are? So Dr. Dawson, can you explain to this audience, what does that mean? And so that they can have some idea, maybe some surface knowledge of exactly what the test scores mean.
Sure. So we received our test scores this past week, and as Dr. Stark mentioned, there is a new accountability in place, accountability system. This is the first year. It will grow and add more components for 18-19. But one of the major changes was how we identified what used to be called priority schools, now called comprehensive support and improvement schools. So those have traditionally been our low-performing schools, and the state has, and the federal government has provided school improvement grants and funds to help support some of those schools. And so without spending a huge amount of time, I could really take this whole rest of the panel to talk about our accountability system, but I won't. Just to briefly touch on it, there's different components that make up a school's, that shows a school's performance. There's no one single score currently to reflect the school's performance. And just like we talked about grading JCPS, it's difficult to give JCPS a single grade. It's difficult to give schools a single score. And so, for example, with our comprehensive support and improvement schools, at the elementary and middle school level, we're looking at 3 areas. We're looking at how students perform in reading and math. That's called proficiency. We're looking at how students perform in science, social studies, and writing. That is called separate academic indicator right now. And then we're looking at growth. And growth is really around how, if students are on track to reach proficiency in reading and math. Now, the other piece that I want to mention around growth is we're also looking at, the state is also including how students, our English language learners, are improving their language proficiency. So that is something different around growth that we've never seen before, and part of that is coming from the state and the federal focus on our English language learners. So I think that that's a great step in terms of looking at each individual student's performance and growth, but when it comes to comprehensive support and improvement, if you are reaching what we call a CUT score, or kind of a benchmark, an overall score in one of those 3 areas, if you met that benchmark, then you're not considered a comprehensive support and improvement school. So what that means is a school has to be performing below those benchmarks on all 3 indicators to be labeled a comprehensive support and improvement school. And if you show higher performance in one particular area, then you're not. So if you have a good year for growth, then you may meet that benchmark and you're not considered a comprehensive support and improvement school. Now in JCPS, our superintendent has and worked with our teachers union and teachers association, JCTA, and part of the negotiations that happened this summer is to build in some support for those schools that might not be considered comprehensive support and improvement by the state, but still need extra resources and support at the district level. So he's calling, he's going to be categorizing schools by levels. So level 3, level 2, and level 1. Level 3 are those comprehensive support and improvement schools, and so they will receive both district and state support. And then we have level 2 schools, and Roosevelt, Perry, and BIC may fall into those level 2, where they will receive district support. And one of those areas that, for those level 2 and level 3 schools is providing teacher incentives to stay and commit to working in a comprehensive support and improvement school, or a school that might be lower performing.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Marshall?
Yes.
You mentioned that in the policy, we talked about a sense of belonging. can you share with the audience, what does that mean for African American students and also the group that feels the least sense of belonging in Jefferson County Public Schools?
So actually, thanks to Dr. Dawson, and I believe it's a national data set as well, our girls of color have the lowest sense of belonging. So we definitely need to focus in on that sense of belonging. But I want to back up. Remember, I told you there were 4 things that cause a policy to fall: lack of interpretation and lack of oversight. If we keep talking about school scores as opposed to the scores by our students of color, because I can tell you an Eastern High School boy versus a Shawnee High School boy, there's not a big difference in their score. But we go to the name brand school, if you will, and think, but what are you doing for our students regardless of where they go? We can fix student assignment tomorrow, but there's no data that says we'll fix racial inequity around academics tomorrow. So how are we going to do that is, if we keep focusing on scores in this very hollow spot, and we don't focus on each and every student, particularly students of color, we fail. Sense of belonging, I always say, until Hidden Figures becomes unhidden, we're in trouble. You cannot feel as if you belong if you're only taught about your greatness in February, and that is for a day. You cannot feel as if you belong if the people that are teaching you do not look like you. You do not feel as if you belong when everything negative you're leading and everything positive you're failing in. Gifted and talented. So when we start talking about sense of belonging, we can talk about Minor Daniels, or we can talk about the W.E.B. Du Bois Academy. W.E.B. Du Bois Academy came with a lot of resistance, some in this room, but there was no resistance to Minor Daniels. That is the all-black first academy of Jefferson County. So there's a lot of contradictions when we talk about what belonging means. So we have to really understand that belonging means you are welcome in a positive way. Because the way historically we've done our alternative schools, we welcome you black boy with open arms. And there was little complaints from black or white as a whole when you talk about that as a community. So what we have to do is create a culture that is welcoming. We have to do that through curriculum. We have to do that through our hiring. Something that if we were in church, I would say this is the shouting moment. 54% of the latest administrators that have been hired have been African American to lead buildings in high school. In middle school, 51% have been of minority hired, and that is under the leadership of the policy and Dr. Polio. Elementary school, I think we're looking at 43. Administrators that are not leading buildings, I think we're looking at 47%. And this is all in the last 7 months of the work. So when we start talking about sense of belonging, we are putting, and you can go look at the website right now, you'll see 3 or 4 beautiful black faces out of 8 leading buildings that just got hired. That is not enough, because then you have to go into the classrooms. That is not enough, because all your kinfolk ain't just kinfolk anyway. And you got to make sure that the people you're hiring are truly about lifting up and learning. But when we talk about belonging and we talk about what it really takes, it is a pivot in the conversation. We have to get past collaborations and into real collaboration. We are notorious for a bunch of collaborations, but we're going to have to really start talking about what belonging means. And the young lady that sat here, I can't remember if it's Ballard or Butler, she has the understanding of what it takes. So sense of belonging comes down to curriculum, comes down to seeing yourself in it, comes down to actually focusing on the priorities and making sure that we are addressing those through a more equitable lens.
Yes.
We have now a lot of those scores are based on state guidelines and state implications, and we talking about this racial equity policy. Well, we got to understand that this is not easy work, you all. And I know, as Dr. Marshall said earlier, there have been things that come through JCPS and come and go, but it's interesting to see the dynamic change when schools realize that we're serious. And we just conducted a training last Thursday with SBDMs, and just to see the level of, they for real now, they actually reading our stuff. And in addition to the scores, I just want to add that, we're starting to do things, we're starting to make things happen. But if we're going to make these changes, especially when it comes to curriculum, books, and things, those things cost money. When it comes to training, those things cost money. So we can't put the weight of making great change in our school district without the resources to go with it. okay? It's one thing to say, oh, y'all ain't right, y'all gotta do better, y'all gotta do this, this, and this, when you tell them, then you taking away the resources in order to be able to do it. So we expected to do more with less. So I encourage you to find out how are we funding this racial equity work? How is JCPS being funded? Or is the rest of the money going out to the state? So it's just some things you need to consider.
Thank you. For those who have questions, please pass your cards to the center of the aisle and someone will pick them up. But I do have a question here, and the question is for Dr. Marshall. How does the current racial equity policy align with the Alternative School Task Force?
How does the current racial equity policy align with the current
Alternative School Task Force?
So, Mr. Dorsey sits on that Alternative School Task Force committee. And one of the things, again, it kind of goes back to disproportionality. It kind of goes back to the student code of conduct. And it kind of goes back to expecting excellence for all students. The Alternative School Task Force should not be trying to think about how to tweak alternative schools. They should be thinking about how to completely change and pivot on what alternative schools are.
Right.
If the Alternative School Task Force is saying if we just tighten this screw here and we just do this here, it is doomed to failure. So when we talk about the alignment, racial equity, there's three pillars: culture and climate, backpack of success, transition skills, and racial equity. If racial equity does not get right in the district, where the majority of the students now, which people still forget, the majority of the students now in JCPS look like me. So if we don't get racial equity right, everything else is for the birds anyway. So when you, regardless of what task force, you can talk about the tree planting task force. If that task force does not put equity up front, racial equity up front, gender equity up front, it is for naught. So when you ask how does it align, it must align with racial equity, because in a district where the majority, unless we subscribe to eugenics, until we start addressing those kinds of things, the councils that we have, if they're not talking about racial equity, are pointless. And you can boil down any situation in most institutions, and it'll boil down to money and race. So unless those committees are talking about resources and race, we're definitely in trouble. I want to recognize Dr. Wayne Lewis, who just walked in. Glad he walked in during the racial equity part, because that is a big part of the racial equity work in Jefferson County Public Schools, and I'm glad he's here to hear it.
Okay. Yes, and in fact, Dr. Lewis has been here all morning.
Oh.
And this person says, I sit on the task force and they have not spoken about the policy, and we are not incorporating it. So I'm not sure how often this task force meets, but it should be something that should be spoken about.
Absolutely, or it's a waste of time task force.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I actually participated in that meeting last Monday.
Okay.
And, yes, they actually proposing some drastic changes, to, alternative schools, but the critical thing is, and what I want you all to watch for, and not only that, but, last I checked, no one at JCPS actually holds the ultimate purse string. When that comes up and we say, okay, this is what we need to make these changes, let's see how well it's resourced.
Right.
Let's see how well, you know, this is what, we're going into October, we got a session coming up, okay? Let's see what the policies are that comes out of Frankfurt. Do they support racial equity, or do they damn it? Okay, do our student assignment stuff come up? Are they trying to get rid of it, or are they trying to support it? Okay? And, are they talking about cutting education funding?
Yep.
Are they trying to bring more to it? So, this is my concern. When that wish list comes up, let's see how well it's resourced. Because the truth of the matter is that if you look at the Brookings Institute or any other top research, they say it's critical to that students of color receive not only a good education, but an education in a situation where they are able to be higher wage earners. Because if that does not happen, because the majority of the population is living longer and older and depending on those social security economic supports, then they will not be able to support that. So it's not just a black or white thing or a good, primarily it's an economic issue.
Okay, I have a question here, and I think this panel has spoken to it earlier. And the question was, how can you be sure the principals are sharing the policy and protocol with SBDM and parents? 5-minute meetings or discussions don't count as in-depth and doesn't get to what matters. And Mr. Dorsey spoke earlier about the SBDM meeting happened this week, professional development, and those schools were able to see that it was not a checkoff, you know, that they were actually reading their plans, they were actually holding them accountable. So I think to your question, schools are now seeing that we are serious about the racial equity policy, and it's not just a checkoff.
I would just add to that, part of each school's racial equity plan includes how are they involving stakeholders in development and implementation of that plan. So that's something that we're going to be monitoring and looking at. Is not just do you have a plan, but how is everybody brought to the table to develop that plan and implement that plan.
Okay. And I want you all to know that the racial equity policy plan was just approved by the board in May. So it is a process, and we're just getting into oversight and planning of that, and the processes and the different stems of that, of different strands. So it's not an exact science just yet. So it is a work in progress. So don't look for a complete answer or exact results today, because again, it's a working process. And also, it is not something that happens overnight. It is systemic. It is a process, an ongoing process. Another question, what steps is the district
What products do you sell with Drop?
Replace the ACES program? And similar to that, minority teacher programs. Those programs were cut by Kentucky Department of Education. So they were KDE programs, so they were not JCPS programs. Now, JCPS is looking at ways, alternative ways to try to reinstitute those programs at the district level. But those programs were not, they were funded, state-funded programs.
So the ACES program sat in my shop, and you're correct. The funding was no longer coming our way, so we had to come up with some creative things. There is a program called CARS, Culture, Access, Resiliency, Diversity in Our Students. We're doing that with the University of Louisville and the College of Education and Pan-African Studies. We are sending teachers back to get their diversity literacy certificate, not in the College of Ed, but under the leadership of Dr. Ricky Jones, going to the Kent School of Social Work to understand what it's like to teach in urban school districts. And this was on JCPS's dime. Some other things that we are doing is actually looking at, and Michael Alexander's here, he's in HR, looking at some clever ways and some ambitious ways to recruit and retain minority teachers, and going to our historically black colleges and universities, identifying students that say that, excuse me, that say they want to major in education, keeping them in the loop, making sure that we keep up with them, conditionally hiring them as early as sophomore, and a conditional hire is under condition you make everything, but conditionally hiring them to come back to JCPS as early as you're at the end of your sophomore year. Some other things that we have to do is make teaching more attractive. One of the things that I believe is kind of twofold. You get more black teachers in front of them, you create more black teachers because black kids are in front of them and teachers in general are in front of them. So that's some of the things that we are doing as well. There's a lot of progress. There's a lot of programs and stuff we're looking at doing. Under the leadership of Dr. Polio, we've actually had a minority administrator recruiter to kind of help do that. So we're working on that as well. But there's a lot more to come in that field.
But once again, you see the dynamic, right? What are we doing about it? Funding's cut. That's all I'm saying.
Right.
I have a question. What happens to a school that does not uphold the guidelines of the racial equity policy? And I know that Dr. Polio is not here, but Dr. Marshall, Dr. Dawson, what happens to a school that fails to fully implement the racial equity policy with fidelity?
If we have a school that fails to implement it, I myself will be curious to see what happens. Because again, this is how policies fail. This is how programs fail. The question in and of itself, and it's a historically accurate question, There's already doubt hidden behind that question that there'll be schools that don't do it. There are 7 people that need to be held accountable, there's a superintendent that needs to be held accountable, and there's a cabinet that needs to be held accountable if one school fails, let alone 15 to 20. So I do not have the answer to that, but what we do know is there's enough data and there's enough monitoring to know that a school said they're doing this and they're not doing it. There's enough information being pushed up to Dr. Polio and the board where they will know exactly what's going on. So the reason I like the policy because it puts a thermometer in everybody's mouth. So we will see who is really serious about this and we will see who's not, because inherently we know that there will be schools, intentionally or unintentionally, that will waver from the policy. So my answer is I don't know, but the answer to you all is there are people that should be held accountable, including everybody that claims to be under the JCPS flag, and the council, and the community as a whole.
Okay, I have another question. How can a teacher with principal certification surpass the Good Award system and get hired? And I know we have someone in.
How can a what?
How can a teacher with principal certification surpass the Good Award system and get hired?
Yeah, I don't know how.
Yeah, but we can say that we do have, speak to Ashley's role in the district.
I can honestly say though that if you look at the hiring processes and the hiring practices, there are some things that we have to do differently. I can say that it is very difficult to identify qualified teachers if and when the process in and of itself does not lend itself to identify the best, but maybe the most popular, maybe the one you think you want. I mean, that's a very difficult situation to be in. So I don't know the answer to that question, but I can say that there are some things in place. And the beautiful thing I like about the superintendent is Black John's just not up here talking about black issues. We got a white chief up here. We got the HR person, that's Dr. Adams. He's going to be talking about this as well. And those are the questions that must be answered. When you have teachers that have been trying to become APs or whatever for a long time, qualified, overqualified, super qualified, and they can't get a sniff, that needs to be answered and that needs to be spoken. My twin brother being one of them. So how do we do that? Let's look at processes and let's look at qualifications. Let's see how we do it.
Thank you. At this time, I want to recognize our Jefferson County Board of Education Chair, Ms. Diane Porter. Thank you for joining us this morning. And we're not able to answer all of your questions, but we do have them. And we do have, we're going to collect them and we are going to look at those questions, see how we can make sure that AI gets the results, we give them a response. And so we put this information shared with Senator Neal. So once again, thank you, for attending this morning, and thank you, panel, for doing a great job. And we'll have a 5-minute break, and then the next panel will be Ms. Diane Porter and Dr. Wayne Lewis for a roundtable discussion. Also, I want to let you know I have the copies of the racial equity policy. For those individuals who want it.
Yeah, there's a machine that takes cards.
Again, if you'd like to have a copy of the racial equity policy, there are some on the table up here.
Good time to walk around and everything.
Still fight the good fight.
Can everybody take their seats, please? Thank you. Thank you.
Let's see, I think the. We're now about to continue our panel discussions, and I'm now going to turn it over to Dr. Rivers of the University of Louisville. Thank you.
I'm going to wait for Dr. Lewis to get back down. So we have Dr. Wayne Lewis with us and Ms. Diane Porter, who's the chair of the board, Wayne Lewis, who's the commissioner. And so we're just gonna have a discussion around the agreement between the Board of Education and the state as a whole regarding the testing scores and the new accommodations. So I'm gonna turn this right over to them. I have a question for the both of them, and then I'll have questions as it relates to different individuals. So the first question is, within the KDE audit and the settlement agreement, numerous issues with special education were identified. What are some of the specific mistakes that have been made in serving the student population, and what particular steps beyond what was required in the settlement will you be taking to correct these problems?
First of all, good morning and thank you for the opportunity to be here. I know you had a stand-up opportunity, so you're not restless, but how many people in here are parents? Raise your hand. Okay. How many people in here work for JCPS or another education entity? How many people love education and know how important it is? So for that, I say thank you for being here this morning because your voice matters. So my question is about the ECE Corrective Action Plan. Is that correct? And you asked me what was the...
I asked you what were some particular mistakes that have been made in serving the student population, and what particular steps beyond what was required in the settlement.
Okay, what are some particular steps that will be made? What were some of the things that were cited in the corrective action plan? So in the interest of not messing it up, I don't have the plan with me. We have read the plan, and the board depends on Dr. Polio and staff to manage the work that's in the corrective action plan. One of the things, I can just give an example. I don't know if this is cited in the plan or not. I'll give an example from when I work with the district. We have students who have an individual education plan because they are a special needs child. So it's important that we keep a specific timeline in meeting with parents and going over the plan to make sure that everything is in place. With ECE, there are many things that we must do correctly. There are many things that we must do on time. So it's important for us to do those things, to do them on time, and ECE requires more staff, more opportunities to work with parents, more services to our students, whether it's behavior services, whether it's learning services, or those kinds of things. My commitment on the Board of Education is to see to it that our district works to correct the things that we are not doing well. My position on the board, our responsibility is to see to it that we have funding so that things can happen for our students. If we need consulting teachers or if we need consulting staff in our individual schools, then my question is, are we doing that? How much does it cost for us to do that? It's our responsibility as a board in Jefferson County to supplement the funds that come to us from the state. Sometimes everybody's funds get cut. And if Dr. Lewis's funds get cut, he can't send us the same amount of money. So our board is responsible for finding the funds to supplement so that no services are left behind for our students. Again, our primary customer, our primary goal, our primary love are students. And it's our responsibility to make sure that everything is in place to take care of the needs of our students. I hope that answered some of it. I'll turn it over to Dr. Lewis.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I appreciate the invitation. I've really enjoyed the opportunity to be here to hear from our panelists and to get to meet and talk with some of you all. To Dr. Rivers' question, I'm as well. I won't read from the corrective action plan. I will tell you in general terms, with respect to the audit that was recently completed and disseminated, that the findings around special education are among some of the most concerning for us. They were among some of the most concerning for them, and I believe for JCPS as well. It is a role where, according to the terms of the agreement, we will continue to have a much deeper level of partnership with the district around ensuring that our kids with disabilities are in fact identified appropriately and then served well. And so when you think about the corrective action plan, and I know many of you have not taken a look at the corrective action plan, it's an incredibly detailed document. We we have talked about over 50 deficiencies noted in the audit. There are almost 400 action steps, specific action steps, some with multiple parts that are part of the corrective action plans. There are a lot of things that we have agreed to do together to ensure that kids in Jefferson County, particularly kids with disabilities there, are served appropriately. I am encouraged with the degree of collaboration that we've had with the development of that corrective action plan. I can tell you that with the reports that I had with our team that was working here at JCPS to develop that plan, that it was an incredibly collaborative and collegial process. By the time the plan got to me, Ms. Porter, I don't know if I've actually even told you that, by the time the plan got to me, I actually didn't make one change because I felt like with the work that they had put into that plan and identifying the specific things that need to be addressed, if we can in fact implement that plan with fidelity in the district, there is no way in ECE or in any other area that it does not lead to substantial improvement in JCPS.
Dr. Lewis, you mentioned that there are over 400 action steps. Can you and Ms. Porter both speak to what are some of the policies and initiatives necessary to meet the deficiencies that you mentioned? And then can you draw us a picture of what you expect educational success of the children in JCPS will look like over time?
Well, in the area of ECE, I'll start. One of the specific ones outside of the details of the action steps of the corrective action plan, we requested that JCPS hire an official at the cabinet level who reports directly to Dr. Polio, who would have charge of ECE services. That's a new position. And let me say, just as a side note on this, even in areas that maybe are not detailed in the corrective action plan, such as the job description for that ECE chief, that's been an opportunity where JCPS and our department have in fact worked together on what that job description looks like, on what the qualifications need to be for that person, background and experience, so that we can ensure that we get somebody at the cabinet level reporting directly to the superintendent with the background, experience, expertise necessary to be able to lead reform in that space. I believe that additional position, that role is so central to changing some of the things the deficiencies that we found in the district in the audit.
Thank you. I'll speak a little bit to the position of chief, which Dr. Polio and the board has decided that will be a chief position. In the settlement that we made with the state, it said specifically that there would be a person that was hired to deal with ECE issues. So it is the determination that the person will be a chief that will be on the cabinet. And I would like to support the words of Dr. Lewis in that you're looking for a specific person. Earlier, I heard the question about I have credentials and I can't get an opportunity for a particular position. The position of chief for ECE services requires a special certification in ECE, as well as the regular undergraduate degree, a master's degree. Some of folks have superintendent certification, but there is a separate certification specifically for ECE. Director of Special Education. So it's about meeting the requirements, and in my tenure on the board, it's not always easy to find that person with that certification, but we will have the best person in place. I do want to say that this is an opportunity for us to kind of go back in time. When I worked for the district, we did have a director, we weren't called chiefs at that time, but someone that sat at the cabinet table that worked with ECE. And that was Dr. Sharon Davis. She's in this room, and I'm not going to look at her because she's going to be mad that I called her name. But we've been there, and we've done that, and we did it very well. And it's about developing a team relationship, not only within the building of central offices, within the individual schools. So we will be working aggressively. The district will be working aggressively. To be clear, as a board member, I do not hire. The board has no responsibility or opportunity to touch personnel issues, but we support what's in the plan. We will get the best person for that
that job, but I just want to be clear, there are specific certifications to meet the requirements for this particular job.
I want to take a step back and think about, so we're talking about the issues that JCPS faces as a whole. So what do you two see as the challenges of JCPS, particularly as it relates to this new plan and the new data that's come out? What do the two of you see as the challenges of JCPS?
Challenges sometimes do not change, they just look a little bit different. Challenges in public education revolve around funding, the dollars that we have to make things work, how we can hire the appropriate people, and how we have enough people in place to do the work. Again, I have mentioned the fact that as the budget changes in Frankfurt, there's less of an opportunity for us to get those dollars, but our students still need those services. So challenges are there as it pertains to funding. As we look at our student population, we want to be able to meet the needs of all of our students. We have many students with mental health issues. That means that we need more mental health staff and more mental health props to help our students get past that. We have a huge homeless population. We have an international population. So it is our responsibility as a board in public education to make sure that we have money in place, we have people in place to meet the needs of the individual child. In my term as an educator and as a board member, I will always say that we have to reach the child where they are. Every child that walks in the door, it's our responsibility to embrace that child, to deal with the needs of that specific child. And we talk about, well, what's so different about education? If you're homeless and you don't know where you're going to sleep tonight, or you weren't sure where you slept the night before, if there's a lot of trauma and drama in the neighborhood where you live, we have to deal with the social emotional issues of our children. So education has changed, but our responsibility has not changed. We are committed to meeting the needs of every child. So I would say funding is always an issue, making sure that we are meeting the needs of every individual student, that we are providing the best quality education, that we are providing them access and opportunities to learn.
I would second all the points actually that Ms. Porter made, and I'll add a few to the list. Obviously, the elements that I'll talk about are not necessarily unique to JCPS in terms of challenges, but in addition to the list that Ms. Porter gave, I would add recognition of the reality that depending on your background, depending on your circumstances, depending on the school or the classroom where a kid is in the district, that the quality of educational services provided for that child varies. And so depending on who you're talking about, depending on where you're talking about, you could talk to parents or kids who have markedly different experiences in your district, depending on where they are. That's not okay. Obviously, we understand that kids come to school with challenges, some with greater challenges than others, some that require specialized training, specialized approaches. We understand that that's a part of the public education business in a district like Jefferson County Public Schools. Obviously, you have some unique needs and challenges that most of our other districts don't face. But the job is, regardless of what the kid comes to us with in terms of their challenges, their needs, that we are responsible for meeting kids' needs. And it's not okay for us to be satisfied with better serving kids who have better advocates, whose parents are more vocal, who have greater income, who live in better neighborhoods. That's simply not okay. So first, I would say is recognition of the fact that there is incredible inequity in the system. The second part is around accountability. And I start this with myself as I talk to audiences across the state. I think accountability has to start at the top and go all the way down. And so I think accountability for me is conversations I have with the State Board of Education are around education outcomes. If in this role I cannot provide evidence of the fact that we are moving in terms of outcomes in this state, then I should not be in this role anymore. And I say that as someone who has no direct influence on student learning in the classroom. But with that said, a chief state school officer, if the state is not moving in the right direction in terms of improving learning across the board, closing gaps between the performance of kids, whether those are economic gaps, race and ethnicity, disability status, if those are not closing under my leadership, then you need to find somebody else. That starts with me, and I'm going to be frank with you. That goes from the commissioner down to the classroom. We have to have greater accountability in our public education system at every single level. That's huge. It's controversial, but I'm going to be honest with you. Obviously, you know I'm not afraid to say things that people don't like. And the third thing is we have to have greater transparency. And that's whether we're talking about our practices, our policies, or the way that we spend money, the way that we allocate dollars. These are public dollars. We work for the public. We are public servants. There's nothing that we do at the state level or at the district level that ought to be behind closed doors or behind. Obviously, there's need for executive session and board meetings and those types of things. But the public really ought to understand what processes we are engaging in to serve kids, because there's nothing top secret here, and you guys ought to be able, as the public, ought to be able to expect and demand accountability and transparency from us.
So Dr. Lewis, this question is particularly for you. When the test scores came out last week, you stated that for the past 5 years, there's been virtually no movement. You call the results a daunting moment of truth for Kentucky. We can't lie to ourselves about where these scores mean any longer. Can you explain that statement for the room?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for the question. We have made little to no movement at all in terms of performance outcomes for kids across our state. Let me preface anything that I'll say further with making it clear to you that I have not and never will believe that test scores are the end-all, be-all. I do not believe that test scores define children. They do not. With that said, test scores are incredibly important indicators for us. You cannot dismiss test scores. You especially cannot dismiss test scores in our state when we have outcomes data in our state, meaning not just test scores outcome, but outcomes in terms of how our kids perform as they exit our public education system. So let me give you some outcomes data that aligns with what we see in test scores as a reason for why I think we need to pay attention to test scores. On average across our state, we send about 60% of our kids on into public education. On average across the country, that number is about 70%. That does not correlate with a state who has the highest or one of the highest high school graduation rates in the country. We graduate over 90% of our kids in Kentucky. 7th in the country, may have moved up to 6th this year. It's an incredibly high percentage. When I say that to my colleagues across the country, they're like, wow, what are you guys doing? It's something we should be proud of. But it does not make sense that we graduate so many kids when the reality is those kids are incapable of being able to move on into post-secondary education and be successful. So something's happening. So we send on average about 10% of our kids less into post-secondary education. When we think about the class of 2010 specifically, because we like to look about 7 years out, of the class of 2010, about 30% of the kids who entered post-secondary education left with any credential. That's a certificate, a diploma, a 2-year degree, or a 4-year degree, 30%. So only 60% went, and only 30% of those who went actually exit with anything. But I guarantee you they left with more debt. So they're going to leave with student debt and without a credential to be able to get a job, to be able to better take care of themselves. And we also know from our real life outcomes data that when kids exit with only a high school diploma, without a credential, without a certificate, that they make about minimum wage, meaning they are incapable of being able to take care of themselves. And so, yes, I am excited about our 90% high school graduation rate, but I am troubled that the high school graduation rate appears to be much less of a diploma and more of a certificate of attendance if our kids are getting them like candy and they can't do anything with them after they walk across the stage. So that correlates with what we see in test scores in terms of not making movement. And so I do believe, while test scores do not define kids, that we have to pay attention to test scores. They highlight the fact that we're not making progress. They highlight the fact that incredible achievement gaps persist. Economically, race and ethnicity, disability status, and we have to do more to address those deficiencies. I'll cite just one more, and I'll allow Dr. Porter to speak. About 50% of our kids across Kentucky in reading score at the proficient level or higher. About 50%. In mathematics, it's less than 50%. For African American kids, scoring at the proficient or higher in mathematics, it's 26%. For reading, it's in the 30s. That's across our state. Your scores at JCPS, they're not significantly different than that. But I would say to you that that's nothing to congratulate ourselves about. We should be alarmed about the performance across our state as well as performance in the district. We simply have to do better. This is not about shaming schools or shaming teachers or shaming leaders. This is about the reality that we're talking about outcomes for our kids. And if we can't improve learning and outcomes for our kids, they simply will not be able to take care of themselves. That's not what we want for our kids or for our Commonwealth, for your community.
Thank you. I want to say that as we talk about being transparent, it's to me it's about being honest about where we are and where we're going. Dr. Polio presented us with our test scores on Tuesday. I continue to look at my individual schools. I continue to make a list of questions that I take to Dr. Dossett. I visit my schools. I want to know what's going on. And I just want to highlight the areas of growth that were given to us by Dr. Polio. He's here, he's going to speak for himself, but I just want to throw these out here. He will probably go more in depth when he speaks. We need to improve in proficiency rates, which is what Dr. Lewis has said. We need to work harder to close the achievement gap across student groups. That means our racial groups, our students with disabilities. We need to increase the percentage of students who are transition ready, those that are leaving high school to move forward. What have we done well? Because a lot of times we dwell on only the negatives. We need to look at both sides of the coin and talk about both sides of the coin. And I clearly support that test scores are the numbers that we have received. It does not determine our destiny. When we get those scores, we look at them, and the next day, our staff gets up, shows up to work with our students. We do not close the door on schools because of test scores. Some of the positive things that have happened in JCPS. All 3 levels reduced the percentages of novices in reading. 101 schools showed reductions. Middle school proficiency rates in readings is at an all-time high. It's the highest it's been since 2012. Our elementary growth scores are above the state average. The performance of JCPS schools in the lowest performing category reduced by 34% from 75% of state identified priority schools to 41% of the state identified CSI schools. Graduation rate in Jefferson County increased to 81.6%. So there are the negatives, areas of growth, and there are the positive. What are some of the things that we are doing about that? We are working to put more dual credit courses in our high schools, so as our students graduate from high school and they go to college, they are in fact college ready. They will have earned classes at the college level. I had an opportunity to meet a young lady that graduated from Western High School last year. She earned 60+ college credits. She is now a student at the University of Louisville. She's there on a scholarship. So we have graduated one. I'm not saying everyone had that same opportunity, but there are success stories in our district. So we're working to improve the dual credit courses and to increase those. Dr. Polio will probably talk about, or you may have heard about, the academies of Louisville as we talk about career and technical education. We are working aggressively with our business partners to put students in learning opportunities. There was just a big program that opened at Valley High School with manufacturing with UPS.
What products do you sell with Drop?
All of our students have an opportunity so that there is the access and the opportunity. Every student will not go to college, but they will be career ready. As we talk about our backpack of success skills, our students have to talk about what they've learned in elementary school, what they've learned in middle school, what they've learned in high school. A lot of times people will say, well, kids don't talk anymore. They don't look at me in the eye. They're not verbal. They don't articulate. Well, they will be, because they're going to have that opportunity, and we're going to listen to them, and that's a part of the learning now in JCPS as we talk about the backpack of skills. Those are just a few of the things I wanted to bring it in closer to what we are doing in our district.
Thank both of you. I want to make an announcement. If you all have questions for either Dr. Lewis or Ms. Porter, can you write those questions down with both your name and your email address? And for those that are not answered here, we're going to pass those questions along to the individual parties, and we'll send those answers to you. So if you can write your questions down with your name and your email address, and then pass those to the center, we're going to get to those questions right after this next question. So I wanted to make that announcement before I turn to the next question. And so the next question I have for you all, and the last question kind of of my questions, is how do you plan to improve relations between the local community and the state as the district and state carries out the settlement between KDE and JCPS?
Let me say, for the first time in a long time, this community has stood with us for public education. For that, we are grateful. I was an employee of the district for 39 years before I became a school board member. You would always see people and they're like, oh gosh, you know, you're in public education, you know, sad face, sad face. There are no sad faces. There are people that are standing up for education in Louisville, Kentucky, and for that, we are most grateful. Give yourselves a round of applause. In my heart and in my soul, I know that we cannot do this by ourselves. For those of you that raised your hand and said that you have children, some are in school, some are out of school, the need remains the same. Whether you have students that show up now, whether your students have graduated, whether you're grandparents and spoiling your children beyond recognition, they're going to come to school as well. So we need your support. We are there for you. We have been visible in this community. We are available. Our board meetings happen usually twice a month. You're not always there. We would love to see you at a board meeting so you can understand better and be closer related to what's going on. But I am not going to complain, because for once I feel that this community has stood up for education, for public education in the Jefferson County Public Schools. It's our responsibility to keep that fire alive, to be available, to keep you engaged and involved, because without you, we will not be successful. And it's not about me being successful, it's about our students being successful. So from all levels, from businesses, from higher education, from homes, from everywhere, we need your help, we need your support. So when we call, please answer the phone.
I think that it is incredibly important that we're all, and when I say all, I mean the Department of Education, JCPS, the community is able to come together, work together for the benefit of our kids. I believe that we're working toward the same goal. I'll tell you that a lot of times contention that gets played out in the media doesn't always match reality. and there's a lot more conversation and collaboration that goes on in real life than you might be led to believe. I don't have any concerns about, as a department, our relationship with JCPS. In fact, I think we have a solid relationship with JCPS that will continue to move forward, continue to improve. We have, as a department, the Department of Education, we have an incredible number of staff who come to work in a JCPS school every day, that serve your kids every day, that many of you probably interact with and may not realize necessarily that they are KDE employees. But we will continue, and trust me, that you will continue to see me, not just KDE staff, but you'll see me. It's important for me personally to be here. In forums like this, you'll see me in your schools, you'll see me in your communities. And so I'm encouraged about what collaboration and relationships look like moving forward.
While we wait for those questions to filter to me, I do have another question. Given the settlement was reached just 1 month ago, can you point to any areas of progress that have already been made, or alternatively, any areas of concern?
The settlement was made a month ago. We were given the charge of taking care of completing the corrective action plans, which Dr. Lewis has spoken to, which our staff worked very hard with staff from KDE to get those corrective action plans. So I'm happy to hear that when they made it to Dr. Lewis's desk, that things were in order and in place. And one of the people that I can thank that's in this room is Dr. Dina Dossett for the hours that she put into that. But it was us working together, and I would want you to walk away knowing that we are working together. We are not being demanded to do anything. We are working together. Working together, we can accomplish much. Some of the work was already in place before we started the corrective action plans, and I'll let Dr. Polio speak more specifically to that, but we were already working on some of the things as it pertains to ECE, as it pertains to career and technical education. The work had already started for some of the work that was submitted in the corrective action plans. As it pertained to hiring the chief for ECE, the conversation was already in place about that, but it made it more specific that we would do that because it was recommended to us, and there was no problem with that. So again, because Dr. Polio is here and because I left my corrective action plans in the car, I'm not going to sit here and make up stuff, because then you would go back and say, that woman has no idea what she's talking about, and you all need to lock the door and not let her in. The corrective action plans that I have, thank you, are about this thick. So I do have them, and I have read them, and I will continue to read them because it's a work in progress. And the good thing about what the board gets from this is staff does the work, but we get updated. So we know what the work is, so we are aware. We're not just going to wait until 2020 to find out what's going on. We get updates so we are aware of what's going on as we take this journey together.
I'm really pleased with the progress we've made thus far, and I don't have concerns at this point. If I do have a concern, then I send Dr. Polio a text and we talk. That's how we work through concerns or questions, and the same goes with him. So I'm pleased with our progress.
Just so you all know, for everyone that registered through Eventbrite, you will get the corrective action plan through an email. So that's one of the links that'll go out after the session ends today. So I've got some questions I'm going to try to work through in the next 25 minutes that we have. So the first question is, what is included in the backpack of skills?
The backpack of skills may look different for every student that's in the classroom. It's what they have been able to achieve. What is their success story? If they've done artwork and that has something to do with what they're learning, they will put this in the backpack. Now, the other thing I don't want you to leave with thinking that we're loading kids so they're going to have broken backs by the time they graduate from high school. The backpack of success skills is digital. So everything is online for you to look at the success that they've made. So anything that they've done, if it's a speech, if it's a piece of art, if they've successfully completed a test, they can determine, working with their teacher, what will be loaded in the backpack of skills. So there's not one size for every student. It's showing their success and their growth in the individual classrooms. They're not wearing it on their back. It's online, it is digital, and we are excited about the concept of how we are developing learning, and they will speak to what's in their backpack. That's something else. As it goes in the backpack, when I talk about leaving elementary, middle, and high school, they will address the things that are in their backpack, why they put them in there, why that was a part of their learning process.
So this question is particularly for Dr. Lewis. It says, maybe if we can stop teaching to the test and teach to the kid, meaning meet the kid where they are academically and progressively, bringing them to where they need to be, I guarantee you will see improvement. Another assessment is not the answer. Do you want to speak to that statement? It's not a question, it's a statement. Do you want to speak to that statement?
So I think the question is referring to the conversation we've had around high school graduation requirements with the reading and mathematics assessment. I'm thinking, Dr. Rivers, you think, is that probably, okay. So first, to clarify, we have not proposed another assessment, to be clear. Both federal and state law at the high school level require that we assess reading, mathematics, science, and social studies once at the high school level. We have not proposed an assessment in addition to measuring those academic standards as we are required by state and federal law. State law permits us the flexibility at the state level to assess those academic standards either through end-of-course assessments, as we've used in the past, or end-of-span assessments, which are tests that come at particular grade levels. In the past, up to last year, we were administering 4 end-of-course assessments in Kentucky high schools. Those were in Algebra 2, English 2, U.S. History, and Biology. Beginning this year, we have suspended the use of end-of-course assessments. Okay? There are a couple reasons why we made that decision. One, the end-of-course assessments that we've used for the last couple of years across Kentucky are bought off the shelf and not aligned to Kentucky academic standards. And so we've been using assessments to test standards, or saying that we're testing standards, when in fact they do not test our standards. So it's not a good practice. The other thing is, as you know, I am moving and recommending to the board to adopt high school graduation requirements that permit greater flexibility in the courses that kids take. And so if you provide greater flexibility in courses that kids get to choose, you can't use end-of-course assessments, because even if I don't require the course, if I require the assessment, I'm essentially requiring the course. So if I continue with a U.S. history end-of-course assessment, while I've said you have the flexibility to choose what 3 courses you want to take in social studies, I've really kind of picked one of the courses for you. So I'm moving to recommending to the board, they'll consider again this week coming, end-of-span assessments for reading and mathematics and for science and social studies. For reading and mathematics, those would come at the 10th grade level. And for science and social studies, those would come at the 11th grade level. They would test Kentucky's academic standards. That is what state law requires that they test. In fact, state law requires that our assessments in Kentucky test only Kentucky academic standards. We're not permitted to test anything outside of those.
This question speaks to actually your comments around end-of-span. So it's about your comments around high school degrees being handed out like candy, but also acknowledging not having a high school diploma can wreak irreparable harm on students' futures. The question is, how will adding a comprehensive exit exam and stricter criteria in order to receive a high school diploma, without adding in any support and resources to ensure students have what they need to succeed, which results in fewer graduates, especially our most vulnerable students, help close our achievement gap and not lead further to the pipeline of prison?
So first, a few things that have to be clarified. One, I've never proposed a comprehensive exit examination. Not true. What we have proposed is the reading and mathematics end of span assessments that I just talked about, that in addition to those tests being used for accountability purposes, as we're required, we report performance levels on all of our assessments, as you guys know, at the novice, apprentice, proficient, and distinguished level. But a little bit just to make sure everybody understands. So Kentucky law requires first that academic standards are developed by Kentucky teachers. The Kentucky Department of Education does not write academic standards. We bring together teams of teachers from across the state, writing teams to write academic standards. We then recommend those standards to the State Board of Education. The State Board of Education ultimately approves Kentucky academic standards. It is also important to know, because I think there was a little bit of confusion in some earlier conversations today, that Kentucky is one of those unique states that says that the state is responsible for developing academic standards, but the state is not permitted in Kentucky to develop curriculum. In fact, in Kentucky, local districts don't have the authority to develop and implement curriculum. By Kentucky law, school-based decision-making councils have statutory authority over curriculum. So what we're talking about at the state level are standards, right? Standards are kind of expectations for what we want kids to learn. The meat on the bones in terms of what kids are actually learning, from materials, textbooks, those types of things, those by law have to come at the school level, at the SBDM council level. So the Kentucky law requires that teachers develop those standards. Kentucky law also requires that teachers write assessments. We do an RFP and bring in a vendor, but that vendor works with Kentucky teachers to develop assessments. As well, we bring in Kentucky teachers and as well as administrators to help us decide what those performance levels need to be. So the cuts that we use to determine what is novice, proficient, distinguished, those are set as well, ultimately by the State Board of Education, but upon recommendation of educators from across the state. What I'm proposing for reading and math now, in addition to the novice, proficient, distinguished categories, is that we set a minimum cut score on the reading and mathematics assessments that is proposed to ensure that a kid receiving a Kentucky high school diploma can demonstrate basic competence in reading and in mathematics. Because the reality is today, and I understand the concern with the question, you're proposing this assessment that's gonna stop our kids from graduating. No, I'm proposing a minimum bar and saying we need to get the kids there so they can graduate. Because I'm not okay with us continuing to hand kids pieces of paper, walking them across the stage and having a high school graduation rate if that diploma doesn't mean something. So what I'm proposing, and I'll be frank with you, is not a high bar. It is a low bar. I'm proposing a low bar to say that we cannot graduate kids who cannot demonstrate basic competence in reading and mathematics. I'm not saying kids have to score at the proficient level even on the 10th grade assessment. Because the cut score will be, to be frank with you, will be below proficient. That's what I'm proposing. In addition, one of the things I think has not been discussed about the assessment requirement that I'm proposing for reading and mathematics is that there are appeals processes built in. So first, the kids would begin taking it at the end of the 10th grade year because at that point, they would have taken all the academic content that they need to be successful on that exam. Again, it's not a high bar test. The other reason they start taking it at the 10th grade level is because they'd have additional 2 times to take it at the 11th grade and an additional 2 times to take it at the 12th grade level. In addition to that, there's built into it an appeals process where a student would be able to submit to the local superintendent, not to me, they're not sending them to me, but to the local superintendent, submit an appeal with a portfolio where if it's just a testing issue, because some of our kids do have testing issues, But if it's a testing issue, they can demonstrate through a portfolio that the kid can in fact demonstrate basic competence in reading and mathematics, and the superintendent would be able to approve that appeal. In addition to that appeal, there's an appeal that we've built in that says if a kid has scored at the proficient level in reading and or mathematics on the 8th grade test, the superintendent can approve the appeal and the kid can move on. So these conversations, friends, this is one of those examples where sound bites don't really do a whole lot of justice. Because people will give you a bullet and tell you he's proposing this, he wants to stop our kids from graduating. And as you see from this conversation, there's a lot more to this proposal. The other thing, this wasn't a part of the question, but let me add, the folks have been saying, he's trying to rush this through and not talking to anybody. This process has been underway since about February. It actually started under my predecessor. In constructing the profile of a graduate, collecting feedback from business and industry, from stakeholders across the state that have informed this as well. When I came in April, it was one of the first things I started to talk about. I was begging the media and folks to talk to me about high school graduation requirements. And you know what they told me? No, let's talk about charter schools. I've been trying to get folks to talk to me about this. But with that said, the second reading of the regulation comes next week. As with any regulation adopted by the Kentucky Board of Education, what follows that, if they approve it, is a public comment period. There's a 30-day public comment period. This is for any regulation that we approve. As a part of that public comment period, there's the opportunity for you guys to submit comments in person. You can send them in electronically. As well, there will be a public hearing where people can show up and can give feedback. And then the board is required to consider every single comment that comes in regarding the regulation. And with a statement of consideration, give consideration to every comment before what we think would be the December board meeting, where the board typically makes changes, sometimes minor, sometimes major, to a regulation before it moves on to approval or review by a legislative committee. So yes, this is the second reading of the regulation of a process that we've been working on since February, but it's not the end. We'll take public comment in a public comment period, and the board will consider it again. It's one part of the process. So we have additional questions there as well. I'm more than happy to talk about it.
So I'm going to read this as it's written. It says, look at the audience today. A district whose population of administrators and teachers that are non-minority. When race is discussed, this is how the audience looks. How will culture and climate be improved in this area under the agreement?
How will culture and climate be improved?
Just how will it be improved? I'm not talking about. How will culture and climate be improved, if at all, given the issues that JCPS faces? Is that one of the issues that you all are looking to address? The question really asks just how will culture and climate be improved?
Okay. Dr. Polio can speak longer on this. When we hired Dr. Polio, he came to us with a plan and some things that he talked to us immediately about, and culture and climate is one of the things that he talked about. Increasing operational efficiency is the other, and deeper learning is the other. So those are the things that he brought to us. Culture and climate means how do I feel when I walk in the building? How does staff feel about showing up to work every day? So how will we work on that? We work on that continuously. Dr. Polio is in schools every week visiting, walking buildings to see what's going on. We've had the opportunity of, as we talk about our chief of schools and our turnaround office, that we're not calling it a turnaround office anymore. I'm sorry, I don't have the right name right now. But there are teams of JCPS staff that are going into schools to build in relationships. You know, there was once upon a time, as here they come with their notepad and their pencil to write us up. That's not the intent. The intent is to be in school, to develop relationships, to work together with the school staff to improve what's going on in the school, to develop a plan collectively. It's not one person, there are multiple people making these school visits. It's about relationships as we talk about culture and climate. As we build culture and climate, have to build relationships. No relationships means that things do not get done well. They will get done, but they will not get done well. If I am a valued staff member, if I am given the things that I need, if I say that I need some additional supports, that not only builds relationships, it changes the culture and climate. The culture and climate and the expectation is that all of our students will learn that every day is not a good day, but we get up and we go back to school the next day, and our focus is on embracing the child, encouraging the child, and educating the child every day. So it's not a close of business. We're done with culture and climate. Our relationships, it's every day. We work to develop those and to meet the needs of our staff, school by school, program by program, and child by child, to make sure that we are doing quality education in the Jefferson County Public Schools.
This is going to be the last question in the answer portion, but as I mentioned, they will email a response to you. So this question is, what results will have to be met by the 2020-21 school year for the KDE-JCPS agreement to have reached success? So they're asking what's the measure of success by 2021.
So let me differentiate a little bit in terms of how I respond. Regardless of whether there was an agreement, regardless of whether there was an audit, my expectation for Jefferson County Public Schools is the same as it is for any other district in the state, and that is we improve education outcomes for our kids, we improve on measures of student learning, that we close achievement gaps, and that regardless of the kid's background and where they go to school, they are being served well. That's across the board, regardless of whether or not there's a settlement agreement in place. Now, in addition to that expectation,